What we want to look at is what are the benefits of guidelines acknowledging agreements and texts such as the UN NCD Political Declaration of 2018 or the Global Health and Foreign Policy Resolution of 2018. My name is Bartholomeusz, and I am the Policy Director for Food Industry Asia. Food Industry Asia is a trade association that works right across the Asia region with a large number of food retailers and food manufacturers, and also some quick service restaurants. So our footprint goes all the way from South Asia to North Asia, China, South Korea, and then all of ASEAN. And we focus on four areas primarily. That's food safety, which is a big issue in this part of the world, the harmonization of trade and looking at regulations around trade, plastics and packaging, which is a big issue for the food industry, and finally, the topic that's sort of relevant for the discussion today around health and nutrition. So these are all areas that we focus on. Now, one of the questions I'd like to answer is, what is the impact of global policy coherence if the CFS guidelines do not align to UN products that speak to nutrition and food systems? I think that it is critical that there are limited or little changes made to such policies. When you take something that's already been agreed upon and then go in a completely different direction. So we agree that you've got to reduce your fat or salt or sugar by X percentage. Now, if you take the companies that I work with and the companies that I represent, they work based on these guidelines. At a midway point, or when you're getting closer to your goal or your target date, if you suddenly come in and change this now to Z% as an example, all the hard work that's been done over the last 2 years or 2.5 years comes to naught. And this is why it is critical when you're talking about policy coherence that the CFS guidelines should align with UN products that are already out there that speak to nutrition and food systems. I spoke about the importance of policy coherence earlier. I guess the next point then what we want to look at is what are the benefits of such guidelines acknowledging agreements and texts, for example, such as the UN NCD Political Declaration of 2018 or the Global Health and Foreign Policy Resolution of 2018. Why is this important for us? I think that especially in a region like Asia, where we work with large food companies, as well as we are in a region where the vast majority of food and beverage players are small and medium scale companies. For them to sort of change tack in the middle of a particular type of either food fortification, reformulation, or a labeling scheme, or even something like advertising to children, to change tack midway is a huge challenge. It's a challenge for large multinational corporations, but you can imagine that it's going to be a bigger challenge for some of the smaller players. Now, we have been working with a number of food companies and in a number of markets here in Asia, where we have worked to have voluntary pledges on advertising restrictions to children. And a lot of these advertising restrictions draw sort of an age line somewhere between under 12 or 12 to 16. Now, there's a lot of talk around raising the age of the child to 18 or addressing anybody as minors. So you can imagine, if I take the example of Malaysia or Singapore, where we have voluntary codified advertising pledges, where companies have pledged not to advertise to children below the age of 12. What happens when you suddenly shift the goalpost and move it to the age of 18? These pledges become redundant. And all the hard work, believe me, a pledge doesn't happen overnight. It takes something like at least 2 to 3 years to get this on the table, to get government, to get regulators, to get industry to agree. And if you suddenly then shift the goalpost, how do you then get everybody to adjust and move to essentially to a word that's very common these days, the new normal? So I think that it is critical that we ensure that the guidelines acknowledge pre-existing agreements and don't stray far away from them. And then finally, outputs from the CFS, like the voluntary guidelines, the VGFSYN, are they more likely to be implemented and operational if policy coherence is followed? I would have to say, coming at it from the perspective of the region that I work in, which is Asia, I would say absolutely. If these guidelines follow the principles of policy coherence, the likelihood that we can get government actors as well as private sector actors to agree on them is much more likely, other than in a situation where they differ very far from pre-existing guidelines. In conclusion, what I'd like to say is that all of us need to be mindful of the fact that certainly in the Asia region, a large number of food and beverage companies are small and medium-scale enterprises. They are not large multinationals. I think the numbers are more than 80% of SMEs here in the Asia region. So we need to be mindful that whatever changes that we make in terms of policy impact a large number of the population, as well as a large number of companies who are perhaps struggling with resources, technical know-how, and also financial capabilities, especially with what's going on with COVID. So I would say that whatever changes that need to be made, whatever policies that need to be adjusted, need to be done in consultation and collaboration with all parties. This is not just about consulting with multinationals and governments. It is about ensuring that you capture the whole food system, and that is the food system from farm to fork.